you feel pain like no other pain. And you know that in your life, it's going to be very difficult to come across something that's going to be even worse pain than that. But it also brings you so close to all those other people out there who have been bereaved.
A leaked development from inside Buckingham Palace has sent shockwaves through the British media. According to the latest reports from royal insiders, just minutes before the state banquet was set to begin, Camilla unexpectedly made a move toward a seat dedicated to the memory of Princess Diana, intending to claim it as her own. But just when it seemed the matter was settled, Catherine suddenly stepped in, blocking her path right in front of the assembled guests and triggering an unprecedented behind-the-scenes showdown. As the atmosphere in the Grand Hall turned ice cold, William made a stunning executive decision. He ordered an immediate halt to all state protocols and demanded the retrieval of original ceremonial files that had been sealed for years in the royal archives. Mere minutes later, an unalterable rule was reportedly unearthed, threatening to derail the entire state banquet and forcing a high-profile figure to quietly step down in humiliation before thousands of guests. Was Camilla genuinely attempting to overwrite Diana's legacy with her own power? Or does that symbolic seat hold a far greater calculated plot? And what exactly did William uncover in those secret files that left Buckingham Palace with no choice but to reverse everything at the very last minute? The crystal chandeliers in the Grand Hall of Buckingham Palace always had a way of reflecting sovereign power in its most magnificent and cold demeanor. On this momentous night of the state banquet, as the footsteps of aristocrats and diplomats prepared to fill the space, every microscopic detail had to achieve absolute perfection in accordance with British royal protocols that had persisted for centuries. Amidst that splendid yet suffocating atmosphere, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, a woman renowned for her innate composure and sharp intuition, was pacing through the hall to double-check the room. Catherine understood perfectly that every silver platter, every vase of white lilies, and particularly the seating arrangement of each chair, carried a profound political and historical message. As her gaze swept across the main banquet table, designated for senior members, a sudden sense of unease surged, tightening her chest. The luxurious velvet chair, embroidered with gold thread, which had always been placed in a prominent corner as a sacred symbol to commemorate the late Princess Diana, had vanished from its familiar spot. Instead, it had been pushed back deep into a dark corner, behind making way for a completely alien arrangement just hours before welcoming the guests. Catherine froze, her fingers tightening around her small clutch. Memories of the royal family's turbulent days, of the mother-in-law she had never met, but who was always present through every keepsake, suddenly came rushing back. The symbolic position of that empty chair was not merely a rule of decor. It was a tacit affirmation of Diana's irreplaceable status in the hearts of the public, and her children an unalterable tradition strictly maintained over many years. This silent displacement was certainly not an accidental oversight by the logistics team. It carried the scent of sovereign power calculation and a patient effort to erase the past. She realized this alteration had never appeared in any previous grand banquet, even during the most sensitive periods of power transition. Without a moment of hesitation, yet retaining her elegant demeanor to avoid drawing the attention of the busy staff, Catherine spun around, walking swiftly toward the corridor leading to the private reception room. Her mind immediately turned to her husband, Prince William. William, the heir to the throne, had long carried on his shoulders the weight of an entire empire, as well as the childhood grief of losing his mother. From that sorrowful milestone in August 1997 until taking over the title of Wales with his wife, he had always been the one to stand up and protect Princess Diana's legacy and reputation against all shifts of time. For William, preserving the symbols associated with his mother at the palace was not just a prince's duty, but the only lens through which he could retain her warmth amidst a royal court filled with cold machinations. Seeing Catherine's hurried yet restrained demeanor as she entered the room, William immediately sensed something unusual. The couple's eyes locked, a silent understanding lingering for a few seconds before Catherine stepped closer, using a gentle yet firm gesture to convey the situation. She did not need to speak in words, merely by pointing toward the hall diagram, and with her solemn gaze, he understood what was happening. Upon hearing his wife's report that his mother's memorial chair had been relocated right before the critical hour, a flash of anger crossed William's eyes. He knew exactly who possessed enough power and motive to order such a provocative change right inside Buckingham Palace. The complex relationship and the underlying rifts between him and his stepmother, Queen Consort Camilla, had long been an iceberg beneath the calm waters of the royal family. Touching Diana's chair was stepping across the red line that William had drawn. However, instead of flying into a rage or immediately demanding to see the logistics team to make a scene right in front of international guests, William chose a colder and more rational path. His eyes stared intently at the palace diagram, his sharp mind beginning to analyze the situation. A decisive resolution was made in silence. He would not confront them directly at this moment to avoid damaging the nation's face, but he would not let the person behind this achieve their goal either. William decided he would covertly investigate lifting the curtain himself to find the person who had dared to sign the order changing that symbolic seating chart. He wanted undeniable evidence before making his next move. The grand hall lights began to brighten, signaling that the first guests had set foot in the palace. William adjusted the fold of his suit jacket, giving Catherine a slight nod as a pact for an underground battle that had just officially begun now that Diana's empty chair had become the epicenter of an impending storm. The thick oak door of the private study closed completely, shutting out the bustling, lavish sounds of the state banquet taking place in the grand hall outside. William stood by the desk, the faint yellow light from the desk lamp casting over a face that clearly revealed solemnity and resolve. Wasting not a single moment, he began reviewing the royal protocol files, which were kept under strict security. Each parchment page and each seating chart from previous years were meticulously cross-referenced by his cold gaze, the gaze of a man determined to uncover the truth. Traces of the modification began to surface through records from several weeks prior. Flipping through the minutes of the royal logistics team, William paused before a series of informal internal notes. Memories of the palace rumors from the previous month suddenly pieced together in his mind. It was during the period of closed rehearsals for the year's major diplomatic events where Queen Camilla had subtly yet firmly suggested adjusting the entire seating arrangement for grand banquets. Through the summarized notes, William could clearly visualize his stepmother's calculation. She wanted every future arrangement within the palace to absolutely reflect her exclusive status and current power as Queen Companion, permitting no ghost of the past to overshadow her presence. However, what caused William to frown and feel even more unsettled was the ambiguity within the management system. Despite flipping through dozens of official pages from the ceremonial council documents, he found no official text or decree bearing the signature of approval from the king, or the supreme royalty for the relocation of Diana's chair. Everything was a complete blank on the legal papers. Yet when cross-referenced with the actual logistical sketches, it was obvious that several junior staff members had silently followed a verbal internal directive or informal scraps of notes from Camilla's office to alter the arrangement. This covert manipulation was like an underground current eroding traditional rules, an effort to turn the usurpation of a symbolic position into a fait accompli without leaving any legal paper trail, thus avoiding resistance from his side. Disappointment and outrage welled up inside the prince, but he forced himself to maintain his composure. Just as he was about to close the file in a deadlock over legal evidence, a gentle yet hesitant knock echoed at the door. A long-serving palace archives official, a man who had dedicated half his life to preserving the historical values of the family, entered with a deferential posture, yet his eyes held a quiet steadfastness. In his hands was a leather-bound wooden box worn with time. Without needing much explanation, the old official slowly placed the box on the desk, gently pushed it toward William, and bowed before withdrawing, leaving behind only a silent message with his eyes that there remained an original set of protocol files untouched and unaltered by anyone preserved from an earlier era. William carefully opened the wooden box. As his fingers brushed against the original documents, stamped with the red security seal of the Royal Chancellor's office, he knew he had found what he needed. This was the foundational code of ceremonies, establishing the unalterable positions of the palace across many reigns, including specific regulations regarding memorial symbols. His eyes stopped at the chapter regulating special state banquets, where clear black ink lines affirmed the status and sanctity reserved for his late mother's empty chair. This file was the sturdiest shield that no contemporary power could overturn using internal directives. William slowly closed the wooden box, his fingers tapping lightly on the worn leather surface, as if calculating a decisive move. Instead of immediately bringing this file out to question the logistics team or directly confront Camilla at this moment, he chose the patience of a strategist. He understood that exposing the evidence at this juncture would only lead to justifications or rushed compromises behind closed doors. He needed a grander stage, a moment when the person behind this change was most confident in their victory to bring the whole truth to light before the eyes of everyone. William carefully kept the original file in his private study, locked it securely, and prepared to step back into the banquet. He would wait patient and cold until the most opportune moment struck to unveil the entire matter. The expanse of the Grand Hall of Buckingham Palace was now filled with flowing evening gowns and glittering ribbons of medals on the lapels of international guests and aristocrats. As the ceremony commenced and the senior members of the royal family processed toward the main banquet table, the subtle attention of the perceptive onlookers began to converge on the center. Exactly as previously calculated, Queen Camilla, in her splendid formal attire and the confident demeanor of one holding supreme power over the household, walked straight toward the seat bearing Diana's symbolic significance. Each of her steps exuded decisiveness, a tacit assertion before the entire assembly of her new unshakable status. But before the hem of Camilla's gown could even brush the controversial chair, Catherine acted. With the innate grace and politeness of the Princess of Wales, she smoothly stepped across the path, approaching her stepmother at a distance close enough to maintain privacy, yet sufficient to create an invisible barrier. Catherine's face retained its standard diplomatic smile, but her eyes held a cold, unwavering resolve. She tilted her head slightly, using subtle gestures of her hands and directing her gaze toward the displaced position as a polite yet direct questioning of why a long-standing tradition had been altered just before the opening of the feast. The conflict immediately escalated in silence through facial expressions shifting in a split second. Confronted with the intervention of her eldest daughter-in-law, the smile on Camilla's lips suddenly froze her eyes, narrowing with sharp vigilance. Instead of conceding, Camilla raised her chin slightly, adjusting her posture to project authority. Through a piercing look and a powerful gesture directed toward the new seating chart, she manifested an uncompromising rigidity, asserting that every arrangement tonight conformed entirely to her current station as Queen Companion, and no one had the right to use the past to stand above the present. In response to that pressure, Catherine did not yield an inch. Her shoulders remained square, her eyes locked without evasion, clearly conveying the stance that certain sacred royal traditions and memories were inviolable and no contemporary title possessed the power to erase them. Just as the atmosphere between the two women was about to hit freezing point, William stepped forward, becoming both the savior of the suffocating air and the instigator of an unexpected turning point. The prince's face was as cold as a carved statue, devoid of any superfluous expression. He did not emotionally take sides, choosing instead the resolution of a man holding royal justice. William raised a hand, issuing a decisive command to each of the ceremonial committee and the orchestra. The orchestral music ground to a sudden halt, mid-measure drawing, astonished whispers from across the banquet tables. William issued the demand to temporarily suspend the entire opening protocol to conduct an on-the-spot verification of the ceremonial files right before the eyes of hundreds of high-profile guests and diplomats. His bold and commanding decision was like a bucket of ice water poured directly onto Camilla's confidence, causing her face to turn momentarily pale with shock and fury. The vast hall, which a second ago had been buzzing with conversation, instantly plunged into a suffocating, deathly silence. Every gaze turned toward the main doors, where the hurried footsteps of the archives officials entering with the protocol file box signaled a truth that was about to be laid bare beneath the light. The silence enveloping the grand hall of Buckingham Palace was so heavy that one could almost hear the beating of their own heart. The Royal Archives officials, their hands trembling under the tremendous pressure of the surrounding gazes, cautiously placed the oak file box onto a side table right next to the main banquet area. Before the eyes of the international diplomats and British aristocracy, who held their breath as they watched the officials began flipping through the ancient parchment pages, meticulously cross-referencing the current seating arrangement with the supreme ceremonial regulations approved across multiple reigns. Each rustle of paper echoing through the still space felt like a hammer blow to the patience of those involved. And then the truth was laid bare, as the fingers of the chief official stopped at a page bearing the red security seal of the Chancellor's office. Through deferential bows and a careful gesture pointing toward the original text, they uncovered the supreme internal directive that carried core legal authority. The document stated explicitly the symbolic position reserved for the late Princess Diana was an inseparable part of state-level diplomatic protocol and must always remain unchanged, left vacant as a mark of respect in all special state banquets. No legal amendment document had been recorded thereafter. The existence of these clear black ink lines instantly stripped away all legitimacy from the new arrangement that the logistics team had covertly established. The psychological conflict was now vividly displayed on Camilla's face. Perceiving the unfavorable reversal of the situation, the powerful woman who was always so confident suddenly showed clear signs of fluster. Her eyes shifted continuously, her fingers tightening around her evening fan until her knuckles turned stark white. Camilla attempted to save face by stepping closer, using hurried hand gestures and signaling with her eyes to the officials in an effort to explain that the relocation was merely a technical adjustment to suit the current welcoming protocol of a queen companion with absolutely no disrespectful intent. However, all her gestural explanations rendered futile when facing the cold black and white pages. There was not a single document, no matter how small, supporting or validating that calculated alteration. Standing before the gaze of the entire assembly, William did not allow the ambiguity any opportunity to linger. His face remained cold, exuding the absolute authority of a future king as he delivered the final verdict. Without a moment of hesitation, William executed a series of decisive movements. He directed a stern gaze toward the logistics staff, raising his hand to issue the supreme command, demanding the immediate restoration of the traditional layout. Under his direction, the staff swiftly removed the superfluous items, returning the sacred space and solemnity to Princess Diana's velvet chair. Immediately after, William turned, directing a direct, cold, yet perfectly polite gaze toward Camilla. With a flawless bow that nevertheless contained unshakable resolve, he extended his hand to invite the queen companion back to her original position on the opposite side where she truly belonged, according to the rightful legal regulations. It was a scene of utter awkwardness and bitterness for the defeated. Camilla, under the pressure of hundreds of eyes converging upon her, had no choice but to comply. She silently turned away, her splendid evening gown now dragging across the floor like a heavy burden. Each of Camilla's steps back to her old seat took place within a suffocating atmosphere. Her face attempted to maintain a facade of composure, but her trembling lips and downturned gaze betrayed the ultimate humiliation and resentment before the entire gathering of high-ranking officials. After the underground storm passed, the strains of classical orchestral music resumed, slowly smoothing over the intense friction that had just unfolded. The chandeliers in the grand hall of Buckingham Palace seemed to soften as well, casting sparkling glints across the silver cutlery and premium crystal stemware. The state banquet officially resumed its diplomatic course, but the atmosphere now bore an entirely different undertone. The center stage of the room now belonged to the empty chair upholstered in velvet and embroidered with gold thread, the sacred symbol of the late Princess Diana, standing prominent and solemn among the rows of royalty and nobility, serving as a silent yet powerful reminder of a past that could never be erased. William stood at the head of the banquet table, his demeanor exuding the peak of composure and majesty, appropriate for a man who had just successfully defended his family's legacy. As he raised his wine glass for the toast to the distinguished guests, his gaze swept across the entire room, pausing for an intentional beat at the empty chair before looking directly toward the diplomats. This was no mere social glance. It was a resolute, tacit declaration before everyone that certain family memories and foundational symbolic values of the British monarchy would never be replaced or manipulated by any contemporary power or fleeting ceremonial calculations. The calm in his every movement, from adjusting his suit to raising his glass, was the most definitive answer to the power struggle that had just concluded. On the opposite side, Camilla sat frozen in her original seat in a thoroughly miserable psychological state. Despite her efforts to maintain a textbook smile and mechanically cut her food and raise her glass, this massive loss of face was too severe a blow to her pride. Her normally sharp eyes were now clouded with melancholy and towering rage, occasionally darting toward the empty chair with unhinged resentment. Facing the curious searching and knowing glances from across the tables of the aristocracy, Camilla understood that she had no alternative but to swallow the bitter pill, accepting this humiliating defeat right in front of the high-ranking guests, as all her efforts to alter the course through internal directives had been completely broken at the hands of her stepson. However, the aftershocks of the confrontation did not stop within the fortified walls of the palace. At the outer edge of the hall, where press photographers were permitted to operate for a limited duration under diplomatic rules, long-range camera lenses quickly captured the most valuable moment of the gala night. The appearance of the iconic empty chair, isolated yet highly dignified amidst the lavish banquet table, immediately became the target for the media. Camera shutters clicked faintly but rapidly in the shadows of the background. Authentic images of Diana's chair, along with the stark contrast between William's cold expression and Camilla's downturned gaze, were instantly and fully recorded, missing not a single priceless detail. Only hours after the gala drew to a close, those shocking images began to leak and spread at a breakneck pace across British media outlets and social networks. The photograph of the lonely yet defiant empty chair in the middle of Buckingham Palace appeared on the front pages of major newspapers, creating a powerful wave of shock within the public consciousness. Throughout every corner of London, public opinion erupted into fierce debates. On one hand, the public expressed deep emotional resonance with Prince William's act of protecting his mother. On the other hand, they relentlessly dissected and criticized the covert calculations of the Queen Consort. The significance of the chair reserved for Diana was rekindled once more, becoming a roaring fire in the hearts of the British public, and plunging the royal court into a new media crisis just as dawn began to break. The early morning fog of London shrouded the ancient grey stone walls of Buckingham Palace, yet the atmosphere within the royal offices was hotter than ever. The tidal wave of fierce backlash from the public and the media following the state banquet had exerted a suffocating pressure upon the entire court system. Facing the photograph of the empty chair, shared at a breakneck pace alongside millions of comments expressing reverence for the late Princess Diana, the palace press office was compelled to issue an official statement. After hours of closed-door meetings under the direction of the king and the heads of the council, Buckingham Palace formally released a message confirming that the tradition of preserving Diana's symbolic seat would continue to be maintained unconditionally in all special state banquets from this day forward. This written acknowledgement served as a definitive affirmation, permanently cementing the legacy of the deceased. This decision brought contrasting psychological undertones to those involved. For Camilla, this was a chapter of absolute irreparable defeat. Sitting in her study looking at the printed press release, her face turned ash gray under the daylight. The debate over her role, her actual power, and the limitations of her status as Queen Companion continued to simmer, dissected across political forums and tabloids alike. Camilla's fingers trembled slightly as they brushed over the lines, affirming the old ceremonial regulations. She understood that from this moment on, any covert effort to alter the order or erase the shadow of her predecessor would be deemed an act of defiance against public opinion and royal law. Resentment now had to give way to cold resignation to preserve what little dignity remained. Meanwhile, in another quarter of the palace, William and Catherine stood by the large window overlooking the square where crowds of citizens were gathering. Composure had returned to the face of the Prince of Wales, but a portion of the burden had lifted from his eyes. His objective had been achieved not merely through the strength of outrage, but through patience and the supremacy of rules. Not stopping at a temporary victory, William pushed for a large-scale and comprehensive review of the palace's entire logistical ceremonial procedures. Under his tight supervision, archives, officials cataloged, sealed, and digitized all original protocol documents, establishing a strict cross-checking mechanism to ensure that no internal verbal directive or ambiguous note would have the opportunity to alter traditional values in the future. As the sunlight of the new day began to pierce through the layer of fog, brilliantly illuminating the vintage portrait of Princess Diana hanging in the private sitting room, an invisible peace enveloped the space. The underground war for status and power within the court had officially closed with the clearest answer. The image of the empty velvet chair, embroidered with gold thread during the gala night, was no longer a subject of controversy, but had been officially nailed into history as an enduring symbol of remembrance, a sacred tribute that the British people reserved for the people's princess. Through all the turbulence of time and the power calculations of those who came after the final message left behind, the royal walls remained entirely intact. There are certain sacred memories and genuine affections that will never and by no one be replaced. After reading this story, do you believe Queen Companion Camilla's humiliating defeat before the assembled guests will force her to abandon her ambitions of securing absolute status? Or is this merely the beginning of an even more ruthless underground war behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.